Hey guys, it's Danny. Welcome to another episode from our Orchid Care for Beginners series. Today we have a good one. I am going to talk about all of the things that will not make your orchid bloom or rebloom. So I have a little list here. This is based mostly on the comments that I received on my YouTube channel in the past decade, but not only, things that I generally see on the internet being talked about in regards to what will make your orchid bloom, which I happen to very much disagree with. So everything today will be my own personal opinion and experience, of course, and in the end I really hope it will help you out, especially if you're at the beginning, especially just so you don't waste time on things that I believe are not important. And I wish when I was a beginner, I didn't invest so much time and effort and concern over. You'll see what I mean. So that said, before we start, as always, today's video and this entire series is sponsored by rePotme.com, who offers you everything you could possibly need to properly take care of your orchid, from potting mixes to pots, fertilizers, accessories, and everything in between. And not only for orchids, but also for other houseplants as well, such as cacti and succulents. So I'll link you to their website down below. Feel free to check them out at any time. I'll also share with you the products that I personally think are worth it. I love them, and I think you'll enjoy them too. And with that said, let us start. Ooh, I'm running out of breath. This is my first video after vacation, by the way. I kind of need to get in the rhythm of things. All right, let's start with the first thing that I believe will not make your orchid bloom. And this is viral DIY potions you might see on the internet, on social media, things that people swear by that you can just make in your home, like tea, banana juice, apple juice. I've seen a lot of them lately. I'm pretty sure one day we're gonna see rose water. I keep coining that. Just for the record, rose water does nothing for your orchid, but I keep mentioning it just because I know one day somebody will make a viral TikTok out of it and I can say, see? It's just that easy. Right, so getting back to the viral concoctions. There are many juices being popularized on social media, on the internet, and all of them are supposed to make your orchid bloom. And obviously, in my opinion and experience, that is absolutely not true. There is nothing about those concoctions that will stimulate any type of bloom. As a general rule, and in my belief, and if you're older on my channel you know this, I don't believe there is a magical solution to making your orchid bloom. I believe proper environment, proper care, together with a mature enough orchid that is capable of blooming, will result in blooming. Orchids are naturally programmed to bloom, so if they have enough energy and environmental stimuli to do this, then they will bloom. Stimuli, I'm not really sure of the word. Sorry for my English. Sometimes it just doesn't work. Now, these DIY hacks have millions upon millions of views on the internet, and that is, in my opinion, the only reason why people do them, to get millions of views. And that's about it. Moreover, I did have a few comments saying that they had an explosion of molds on top of their potting mixes with their orchids because they used an organic concoction. I don't remember if it was banana or something. Yes, you can definitely do more harm than good with these concoctions. I would strongly advise you to just not do them and just not waste your time with them. Focus on good culture, an adequate care regime, and let your orchid do its thing. It is naturally programmed to bloom. Next up, oh, this is an oldie but goldie. Maybe some of you who are new in the hobby, maybe you don't remember this one. I don't know if it's as popular as it used to be, but yeah, sadly, if you can believe it, bringing your orchid close to demise, stressing it to the point where it's actually starting to get set back, it was believed it would induce blooming. Counterintuitive, right? Well, at some point in this hobby, people believed that stressing an orchid can actually make it bloom as a sort of a last resort to save itself. And that is, in my opinion, wrong on many levels. We love these orchids. We're all about trying to figure out how to better care for them, not to stress them so much that they're on the verge of actually kind of losing the battle, right? Personally, I struggle with the concept of orchids blooming as a last resort anyway. In my experience, a more typical response of an orchid when it's stressed is to try to either grow, in the case of sympodials, roots, pseudobulbs, leaves, so on, or try to propagate itself through keikis like Phalaenopsis and Dendrobiums and a few other species that can produce keikis. In my experience, that is the most likely and more common response to extreme stress or to an orchid which is so sick and set back that we cannot even expect it to bloom. Blooming takes up a lot of energy from an orchid, and yes, I do know that the Phalaenopsis hybrids that you find at the flower shops are just blooming no matter what. Those are an exception in my opinion. As I was saying, they are hybrids. They have been hybridized for so many years and so many generations that in my opinion, sometimes they kind of glitch out, as it were. They do not behave as a species would, and sometimes they will just not prioritize their own survival. Coupled with the fact that Phalaenopsis orchids, the ones in flower shops, not all of them, they are stimulated by environmental temperature into blooming, and some homes do have lower temperatures. Couple the genetic clown fiesta they have, plus the lower temperatures in homes, yes, they will be much more prone to blooming even if they're sick, even if they're stressed, even if you name it. You cannot really tell with those orchids anymore unless you have something closer to a species or you have other types of orchids. I can see how someone might come to the conclusion that the more stress you put on an orchid, the more it will be prone to blooming. In my opinion, and this is kind of a general motto in my life, correlation does not imply causation. Just because some Phalaenopsis orchids, and maybe other orchids as well, can still bloom while almost being gone, doesn't really imply that we need to stress the orchid so much that they will give us blooms. If we reach that point that we think we need to stress it to obtain a bloom, because otherwise we cannot obtain a bloom, the problem is different. Maybe our environment is not adequate for that particular species, which is totally fine, happens a lot, happens to me as well. As I discover new species, I also discover that some are just not meant for my climate. Looking at you, Neophanesias, is just too warm for them. And that's okay if some orchids just don't work out for you. There are others that I'm sure will, and you don't have to stress that orchid to make it bloom, or it simply isn't capable of blooming due to maturity issues or due to care issues, such as maybe watering or fertilizing. Maybe you were on top of them, and that again is okay. You don't have to be perfect with your orchid. None of us are. We have to do our best. Sometimes for some orchids, our best isn't enough. But if you cannot make your orchid rebloom, no matter what you do, then do consider that maybe it's not the right orchid for your situation and environment, and that is absolutely fine. No need to stress it. Just find another home for it. I'm sure somebody will be happy to have it. Just don't stress it. And yes, offering a slight cool down in the winter for Phalaenopsis orchids is not stressing. It's just the natural course of their ancestors' life in the wild. Next up, I think we need to move through these a little faster. We're gonna be here until tomorrow. I have 9 things actually. Number 3 is cutting parts of your orchid in order to make it bloom. There is an exception, the Phalaenopsis orchid and its flower spikes. I'm gonna address it, but I mean something else. At some point in my comment section, I did find some comments suggesting that if you divide your orchid or cut away some pseudobulbs or do something of the sort, you're gonna induce blooming on an orchid. Obviously, this refers to sympodials, so not Phalaenopsis or Vandas, but Oncidiums, Cattleyas, Dendrobiums, and so on. And that is not true. You can definitely divide an orchid and you can propagate it and have more of the same orchid or share it with a friend. I'll link it to our video on that subject down below, but that will not induce blooming necessarily. It could happen that your orchid will bloom after you divide it, but again, correlation doesn't imply causation. It was just the moment for that orchid to bloom. You can definitely divide orchids and not have them bloom for 2 years because maybe they need to recoup from something. Maybe division was correlated with the loss of roots. instances are always different, so just division by itself cannot really stimulate orchid blooming. Some people do suggest, for example, cattleyas, when they get big, that if you let them be and don't divide them, they will just stop blooming and they will grow vegetatively. In my experience, again, that is not true. How come you see so many specimen-sized orchids on the internet having a ton of blooms, being really big orchids, nobody divided them? Yes, if you divide an orchid, you can promote new growth and new directions of growth, actually. And those can produce flowers of their own, so they can, or rather you can, make a bigger specimen out of it, but that's a whole different story. That has to do with the growth more than anything, not with the blooming. So chopping away random pseudobulbs on your orchid, not gonna make it bloom. Be careful with that. Be sure you do not leave your orchid bare. It needs those pseudobulbs, maybe not all of them, but maybe most of them it does. Now, the exception to this rule, of course, is the Phalaenopsis orchid, the flower shop Phalaenopsis, which, as some of you might know, can be encouraged into producing a secondary flower spike if we cut the main flower spike above a node. We have a video on that. I'll link you to it down below. I'm not going to insist on it. So that is an exception, of course, but a flower spike is not a vital structure of an orchid. If you cut a flower spike, no matter where, you're not gonna put the orchid's life in danger. However, leaves, stems, crowns, roots, pseudobulbs, these are vital structures and we need to be careful with them. So if you're considering dividing your orchid, do it for other reasons, not for inducing blooming. My co-host is very, very fragrant. She is wonderful. Do you even see the flowers? She's just wonderful, isn't she? Right, next up, keeping orchids in the dark. Oh, again, this was an oldie but goldie. Maybe 5-6 years ago, there was this trend at some point, I saw it in my comment section, that were saying that orchids need complete darkness in the nighttime, otherwise they will just not get the proper day-night cycle, so they will not bloom. And at the time, I was still growing some of these orchids outside for the summer, and I had street lights and all of those light pollution elements. My orchids bloom just fine. You don't have to put an orchid in the closet at night because somehow that will make it bloom. It will not make it bloom. I will say though that it's not a good idea to keep on the grow lights if you're using them 24/7. Absolutely not. Orchids need a daytime and a nighttime, and for the vast majority of the species, it's a good idea to keep day length as long as night length. So what I personally do is a 12-hour lights on, 12-hour nighttime. This regulates their breathing and their metabolism. Actually, if you keep the light on all the time, they will not photosynthesize correctly. Some light from outside, that's absolutely fine. In nature, they would have moonlight as well. That is okay. I don't think you should go to the extreme of just putting them in the closet or anything of the sorts. Just don't leave the grow light on all the time, pretty much. So I haven't seen this making the rounds in a while. Maybe it's not a common belief anymore, but it was at some point. Next up, repotting. Yes, repotting will not make your orchids bloom. Now, I say this because many of the times, or actually quite often, I get comments saying, I repotted my orchid into this medium and I water it and so on, but it's still not blooming and I repotted it like a month ago. How long do I need to wait? Well, as long as the orchid feels like, kinda. Repotting itself has nothing to do with promoting a flower spike. It has to do with promoting health. Yes, a proper pot, a proper potting mix will promote health on your orchid, and in return, it will promote the ability to bloom and how well your orchid will bloom. But it will not be an instant thing. It's not actually inducing blooming like lower temperatures do for Phalaenopsis orchids. So just because you repot an orchid doesn't mean it will bloom. It could bloom depending if the season is right, if the growth pattern is right. Some orchids only bloom when they mature as pseudobulb. If all the stars align, as it were, yeah, it can bloom, but not because you repotted it, but because it was time to bloom, and because you treated it right, and because the environment is good, and so on and so forth, and because it's healthy, which, yes, repotting helps with, but it doesn't really promote. So if you just repotted your orchids, you don't have to like watch the clock and think that it will bloom any moment now. No, it's gonna bloom when it's supposed to bloom. And for some orchids, maybe sometimes it's gonna bloom after 2 years if they're seedlings. Next up, bloom boosting fertilizers. Okay, so this was an idea, and it still is, by the way. You will still find on the market bloom booster type of a fertilizer. So fertilizer that is meant to promote blooming and a fertilizer that is meant to promote vegetative growth. I feel like people don't really go for those stuff anymore, and I'm happy about it because I used to believe bloom boosters actually make a difference until I stopped believing that about 7 years ago. And what I use now is more of a vegetative growth, I guess, intended fertilizer. Honestly, you can use a balanced fertilizer. I personally love, for the past 7 years, the MSU, which does have more nitrogen. We'll not go into the details. It's not a bloom booster fertilizer, but I have so much success with it because it offers my orchid all the nutrients that help it accomplish its functions: breathing, photosynthesis, building new structures, and so on and so forth. It does not promote blooming, but it doesn't have to. Fertilizers only need to support growth and function. That is it. Beyond that, blooming is the orchid's job. She will bloom. And the healthier and happier it is, the better the bloom show will be as well. Now, I do believe that maybe in some cases, these bloom boosters, which have different ratios of macronutrients, maybe they can enhance a little bit, maybe the coloration of the blooms, or I'm not entirely sure, but I can see that it might have a sort of an impact. But I certainly do not believe that it makes a difference between a blooming orchid and a not blooming orchid. Again, you can have the experience of switching to a bloom booster and all of a sudden your orchid blooming. That's really coincidence. It happens to me sometimes as well. And then it doesn't happen the second time, you know? I continue with the bloom booster, but it stops blooming. So what did I do right? What did I do wrong? Because it wasn't the bloom booster, right? So yeah, these things can happen, and I can see how some people, because they're advertised as bloom boosters, they associate that fertilizer with the ability of blooming. I personally don't believe it has any effect. I believe it could enhance maybe the appearance of the flowers. I don't know if the number of the flowers. Maybe it has that effect. I cannot say it doesn't, but in my opinion, really it has nothing to do with inducing blooms. And certainly I haven't used bloom boosters in 7 years. I don't miss them. And lastly, and this is indeed what I want to leave you all with, cheap or expensive products. Alrighty, so hold on, I'm gonna get some products to showcase. Alright, so here we have 2 very different orchids, which are, well, they have been blooming. This one still have buds. This beautiful Sologeny is potted in one of rePotme self-watering pots, which I love. These things work so well with my climate and lifestyle. I really love them. But it doesn't mean that I cannot rebloom or bloom an orchid in a 50-cent nursery pot. I can, but this pot doesn't really tell me how good the roots are. If I would have used a slotted or transparent pot, actually, I would have seen the roots. Do I need it? No. Would it help me to have a transparent pot? Yes. Would it help me to have a self-watering pot? Yeah, absolutely. My climate is made for vice versa. The self-watering pots are made for my climate. But it doesn't mean that I cannot get away with other things. And I'm saying this because I always see comments saying that somebody just bought a product that I'm using and their orchid didn't bloom. It's been a month or 2 and it didn't bloom. Well, Sally, it doesn't work like that. I mean, if I could have all of my orchids bloom at the same time, that would be fantastic, but I cannot. And definitely the fact that they do bloom is not because of individual products that I use. It's because I choose these products just to work with me and just to have synergy with them and myself. Yes, good quality potting mix can keep your orchid healthy, and a healthy orchid is more likely to bloom. But your orchid will not bloom immediately after you put it in a certain potting mix, and definitely if your orchid simply doesn't go with your environment, no matter what type of potting mix you use, it will still not bloom. So the potting mix, the pots, the setups, or the different products that you're using will not induce the bloom. They will help keep your orchid healthy, in my opinion. And that's the most important thing that we should aim for. We should expect that by using certain products and certain techniques and stuff, we should expect our orchid to be healthier because these products help us. And the result of a healthy orchid is blooming if conditions are right. But do not expect a sudden change in potting mix or pot or things of the sorts to give you blooms instantly. No matter the product you're using, whether it's 50 cents or €1 or whatever, no matter the brand or price of it, they will not make your orchid bloom overnight. They will help you keep your orchid healthy. And in my opinion, that is what you should aim for. You should not aim for having flowers. You should aim for a healthy plant because that plant is more and more likely to bloom. And certain products will work better with your environment. For example, this self-watering pot works absolutely fantastic with this plant, which is very prone to getting dehydrated and having some dehydration signs if I'm not on time with watering it. We just actually repotted this one like a couple of months ago in this pot. If you missed the video, check it down below. So a self-watering pot definitely helps me better take care of this orchid, and the result of the pot and potting mix and my time invested in this orchid is of course blooms. And that is the idea that I do want to leave you with. Aim for having healthy orchids, not blooms, because if you really want blooms, you're gonna be prone to watching all of those useless 30-second hacks on social media, which are, in my opinion, more damaging than good. So have a healthy orchid and then see about the blooms. Alrighty, so that said, thank you guys so much for watching. Hope this video helps you out, and I hope you don't waste your time with things that really don't help you that much in reblooming your orchid. Check the description below for care tutorials on cattleyas and other very popular orchids if you're a beginner with them. And stay tuned for our next episode, in which I will tell you what actually does help you rebloom various types of orchids. So until then, I hope you have a great day. Thank you, rePotme, for sponsoring yet another episode. And with that said, I'll see you next time. Bye!